echoes of an unfinished past. The sky was an unsettling shade of gray, somewhere between dusk and rain, as I walked down the quiet street lined with ginkgo trees. Their yellow leaves blanketed the pavement like relics from a past season, crushed under hurried footsteps and forgotten. I hadn't planned on coming back here. In fact, I'd spent years convincing myself that there was nothing left to return to. And yet, there I was, the weight of familiar memories pressing down on me with each step I took. The town hadn't changed much. The narrow alley leading to the river still curved in that same lazy arc. The shop fronts still clung to their peeling paint, and the air carried the faint scent of roasted chestnuts from the street vendors who had always set up just beyond the main square. I had grown up here, once, before everything fell apart. At the corner of the street, I paused. My gaze caught on the small coffee shop nestled beneath a tangle of ivy and fading signage. It was still there. The place we used to meet after school, back when the days felt endless and life was simpler. Or at least, that's how it seemed. I could almost see my younger self through the window, sitting at the corner table, waiting. Back then, I thought waiting for someone meant they'd always come. But time has a way of teaching you that people leave even when you don't want them to. Especially then. I turned away, but not fast enough. That's when I saw him. Standing across the street, leaning against a lamppost like he had nowhere to be. But the tension in his posture told a different story. He was dressed simply, just jeans and a dark coat, but he carried himself with the quiet, restrained grace that had always set him apart. His gaze met mine, and for a brief second, the years between us dissolved, leaving behind the echo of something I had long tried to forget. I didn't move, neither did he. The distance between us felt insurmountable, yet painfully close. How long had it been? 8 years? 10? It felt longer and shorter all at once. I thought about walking away, but my feet wouldn't obey. There was a heaviness in the air, thick with words that would never be spoken and questions neither of us dared to ask. Before I could gather my thoughts, he turned and walked away. No hesitation, no backward glance, just like before. The house was just as I remembered. Quiet. A little too cold, the walls heavy with unspoken truths. My mother was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with the same efficiency she had always applied to every aspect of her life. She didn't look up when I entered, but I could tell she had been expecting me. Somehow, mothers always know. I dropped my bag by the door and sat at the table, the familiar creak of the old wooden chair grounding me in the present. She asked me about the train ride, about the weather, about work. I answered, offering just enough to fill the silence, but not enough to invite further questions. It was a dance we had perfected over the years, this careful balance of distance and closeness. Later, as I lay in my old bed, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, I let my mind drift back to that moment on the street, to the way he had looked at me, as though time had rewound, but nothing had really changed. The next morning, I wandered down to the river. The air was crisp, laced with the first hint of winter, and the water shimmered under the pale morning light. This had always been my favorite place, a quiet refuge where the world seemed to slow down. I used to come here to think, to dream, to escape. I was standing by the edge of the water when I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't have to turn around to know it was him. Some things you just feel. He stopped a few paces away, and for a moment we just stood there, the silence stretching between us like a fragile thread. I wondered if he could hear my heartbeat, loud and unsteady in the stillness. He stayed for a while, neither of us saying a word, and then he left as quietly as he had come. Days passed in a blur of familiar routines and carefully maintained small talk. I helped my mother in the garden, ran errands around town, and tried not to think too much about the things I couldn't change. But no matter how hard I tried, he was always there, lingering at the edges of my mind, like a shadow I couldn't shake. I saw him again, of course. In a town this small, it was inevitable. Sometimes our paths would cross on the street, or I'd catch a glimpse of him in the distance. And each time, it felt like a punch to the gut. Not because of what had happened between us, but because of all the things that hadn't. One afternoon, as I was leaving the grocery store, I saw him sitting on a bench by the park. He was staring at something in the distance, his expression unreadable. I almost walked past, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the way the light caught in his hair, or the quiet sadness that seemed to hang around him like a second skin. I stood there for a moment, torn between the past and the present, before turning and walking away. Some wounds, I reminded myself, don't heal just because you want them to. On my last day in town, I went back to the river. The sky was clear, the water calm, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace. I had come back here looking for closure, but maybe closure wasn't something you found. Maybe it was something you created for yourself, piece by piece, until the past no longer held you captive. As I stood there, watching the sunlight dance on the water, I realized that it didn't matter if we never spoke again. What mattered was that I had finally stopped running. From him, from this place, from myself. And in that moment, I knew I was ready to move on. The morning I left town, the sky was overcast, as though the sun had decided not to wake that day. My bags were packed, my goodbyes already said, but I lingered at the door longer than I should have. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the heater in the corner. My mother had gone out early, leaving a note on the kitchen counter with instructions about the plants and a reminder to eat breakfast. I hadn't touched either. Outside, the world felt muted. The air was cool but not unpleasant, and the streets were empty except for a delivery truck parked near the corner. I had spent most of my time here trying to avoid looking back, but now that I was leaving, I found myself noticing the little things I had ignored before. The way the ivy had grown thicker around the windows, the cracks in the pavement that traced familiar paths beneath my feet, the smell of damp earth after last night's rain. This town had been my whole world once, but standing there on the verge of leaving, it felt smaller somehow. Quieter. I walked slowly toward the station, dragging my suitcase along the uneven sidewalk. The sound of the wheels bumping over the cracks filled the air, loud in the stillness. I hadn't told anyone exactly when I was leaving, and there was something comforting about that. The idea of slipping away unnoticed, as though I had never really come back at all. The station was just as I remembered, with its faded benches and peeling signs. I bought my ticket and found a seat near the platform where I could watch the trains come and go. There was something soothing about the rhythm of it, the steady arrival and departure, the brief moments of stillness in between. I wondered, not for the first time, what it would have been like if I had stayed, if things had been different, if I had been different. I was so lost in thought that I didn't notice him at first. He was standing a few meters away, leaning against one of the old wooden pillars, his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. He wasn't looking at me, but somehow I knew he had been there for a while. Watching, maybe, or just waiting. A part of me wanted to look away, to pretend I hadn't seen him. But it was too late for that. We had been dancing around each other for days now, caught in this strange, silent orbit that neither of us seemed willing to break. And maybe that was the problem. Maybe we had spent so long avoiding the truth that we no longer knew how to face it. The train pulled into the station with a low, mournful whistle, and I stood up, grabbing my suitcase and slinging my bag over my shoulder. He didn't move, but I could feel his eyes on me as I walked past, his gaze heavy with all the things we would never say. As I stepped onto the train, I felt a strange sense of finality, like I was closing the door on something I hadn't fully understood. I found a seat by the window and watched as the platform blurred into motion, the town slipping away behind me in a haze of gray and green. For a while, I just stared out the window, letting the steady hum of the train lull me into a kind of half-sleep. But my mind kept drifting back to him, to the way he had looked at me that day by the river, and the way he hadn't looked at me at all at the station. It was as though we had become strangers, caught between the past and the present, unsure of where we belonged. I thought about the last time we had spoken, all those years ago. I had been standing on that same platform, my suitcase packed, my heart in pieces. He had been late, and I had been angry. We had fought, of course, we always did, and when the train finally arrived, I had boarded without looking back. I told myself it was for the best, that we were too young, too different, too broken. And maybe we were. But some part of me had always wondered what would have happened if I had stayed, if I had waited, if he had asked me to. The train slowed as it approached the next station, and I realized, with a jolt, that I didn't know where I was going. I had bought the ticket without thinking, choosing the first destination on the list, but now the thought of arriving somewhere unfamiliar felt overwhelming. I closed my eyes and leaned back against the seat, trying to calm the restless ache in my chest. When I opened my eyes again, the train had stopped, and the platform was empty, except for a woman with a red umbrella standing near the ticket booth. I watched her for a moment, fascinated by the way she seemed completely still, as though she had all the time in the world. It was a kind of stillness I had never mastered, no matter how hard I tried. The train lurched forward again, and the platform disappeared from view. I felt a pang of regret, though I couldn't have said why. Maybe it was the quiet, or the rain, or the way the woman had stood there, waiting for something I would never understand. By the time the train reached the final stop, the sky had cleared, and the air was warm with the promise of afternoon sun. I stepped off the train and followed the small crowd toward the exit, my suitcase bumping along behind me. The station was smaller than I had expected, with just one platform and a single ticket counter, manned by an older woman with a kind face. She smiled at me as I passed, and for a moment I felt the strangest urge to tell her everything. About the town I had left, and the boy I couldn't forget, and the years I had spent running from a past that refused to let me go. But of course, I didn't. Instead, I smiled back and walked out into the sunlight, letting the warmth of the day wash over me like a balm. The town was quiet, and I wandered aimlessly for a while, letting my feet carry me wherever they wanted. I passed a bakery with a display of freshly baked bread, a bookstore with faded paperbacks stacked in the window, and a park where children were chasing each other around a fountain. It was the kind of place that felt suspended in time, untouched by the chaos of the outside world. Eventually, I found myself by the river. It wasn't the same river, of course, but it was close enough. The water was calm and the sunlight glinted off the surface like shards of broken glass. I sat down on a bench near the edge and watched as a pair of ducks floated by, their feathers ruffled by the gentle current. For the first time in days, I felt something close to peace. The ache in my chest was still there, but it had softened somehow, like a bruise that had begun to fade. I closed my eyes and let the sound of the water fill my ears, drowning out the restless hum of my thoughts. I stayed there for hours, watching the sun dip lower in the sky until the river turned to gold. And as I sat there alone but not lonely, I realized something. I didn't need to go back. I didn't need answers or closure or a second chance, because some stories don't have endings. Some stories just are, and maybe that was enough. I stood up, brushed the dust from my jeans, and turned away from the river. The past would always be a part of me, but it didn't have to define me. Not anymore. And with that thought, I walked away, my steps steady and sure, leaving the river and the past behind. The sun was dipping low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the cobbled streets as I wandered back toward the station. The air had cooled with the onset of evening, and a soft breeze rustled the leaves on the old chestnut trees that lined the path. I walked slowly, savoring the quiet, trying to imprint the feeling of this place on my mind. It wasn't home, not in the way my old town had been, but it felt like a place where I could rest, if only for a little while. As I approached the station, I noticed a small cafe tucked away at the end of the street. The sign above the door was faded, the lettering barely legible, but the soft glow from the windows was inviting, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee wafted out each time the door swung open. On impulse, I decided to go in. The cafe was small and cozy, with worn wooden tables and mismatched chairs that gave it a lived-in charm. A few people sat scattered around the room, reading or chatting in hushed tones. I chose a table by the window, where I could watch the street outside, and ordered a cup of tea. The waitress smiled as she set the cup down in front of me, and I nodded my thanks, feeling a little lighter for the brief, wordless exchange. I sipped the tea slowly, letting the warmth seep into my bones. Outside, the sky had deepened to a rich, velvety blue, and the first stars were beginning to appear, faint and distant. I watched as people passed by on the street, their faces lit by the soft glow of the street lamps. Some walked quickly, heads down, lost in thought. Others strolled leisurely, hand in hand, their laughter ringing out like notes in the evening air. For a while I just sat there, watching the world move around me, content to be still. It was a strange feeling, this quietness inside me, as though I had been holding my breath for years and had only just remembered how to exhale. I was finishing the last sip of tea when I saw him. He was standing across the street, leaning against the lamppost, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his coat. His hair was a little longer than I remembered, and there was a hint of weariness in his posture. But it was him. There was no mistaking that. My heart stuttered in my chest, and for a moment I couldn't move. I just stared, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to be back in our town, living his life, forgetting me. But he wasn't. He was here, and he was looking right at me. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to stay hidden in the safety of the cafe, to pretend I hadn't seen him, to let him walk away again without confronting the tangled mess of our past. But another part of me, the part that had been holding on to him all these years, knew that I couldn't. Not this time. I stood up slowly, my hands trembling slightly as I gathered my things. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and walked toward the door. By the time I stepped outside, he was already crossing the street, his strides long and purposeful. He stopped a few feet away, his expression unreadable, and for a moment we just stood there, caught in the strange, suspended silence that always seemed to follow us. The street around us seemed to blur, the distant hum of traffic fading into the background, until it was just the two of us, standing beneath the pale glow of the street lamp. I could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes and the way his shoulders rose and fell with each breath. And I wondered if he was as nervous as I was. He didn't say anything, and neither did I. We didn't need to. There was too much history between us, too many words left unsaid, and somehow, in that moment, silence felt like enough. After what felt like an eternity, he nodded once, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, and then he turned and walked away. No hesitation, no backward glance, just like before. But this time I wasn't angry. This time I didn't feel abandoned, forgotten, or lost. This time I understood. Some people leave and some people stay. And sometimes the ones who leave are the ones who love you the most. I stood there for a long time after he disappeared from view, the night settling around me like a blanket. The air was cool, but I didn't feel cold. For the first time in a long while, I felt free. Free to move forward, free to let go, free to love, even if it meant loving someone from a distance. I took a deep breath, savoring the crisp, clean air, and started walking. Not away, not toward anything in particular, just forward. And as I walked, I felt something shift inside me. Something small but significant, like a door creaking open after years of being stuck. Maybe I wasn't running anymore. Maybe I was finally going home. The streets were quieter now, and the faint scent of rain hung in the air, though the sky remained clear. I walked slowly, letting my feet guide me without any sense of urgency. There was nowhere I needed to be, no destination waiting for me, and that felt strangely liberating. For so long, I had been chasing something. Closure, perhaps, or understanding, or maybe just a version of myself that I had lost along the way. But now, for the first time, I wasn't chasing anything. I was simply being. I passed a row of shuttered shops, their windows dark, reflecting the soft glow of the streetlights. In one of them, I caught a glimpse of my own reflection, and for a moment, I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. There was something different about her, something quieter, softer. She looked tired, yes, but there was a lightness to her that hadn't been there before, as though she had finally set down a burden she had been carrying for far too long. I kept walking. Eventually, I found myself back at the river. It looked different at night, the water dark and still, the surface reflecting the scattered lights from the surrounding buildings. The bench where I had sat earlier was empty, and I hesitated for a moment before sitting down again, folding my hands in my lap and leaning back against the worn wooden slats. The air was cool against my skin, and I closed my eyes, letting the quiet sounds of the night wash over me. The distant hum of a car engine, the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze, the gentle lapping of the water against the riverbank. It was peaceful, and for the first time in what felt like forever, my mind was quiet. No racing thoughts, no nagging doubts, no endless spiral of what-ifs, just quiet. I sat there for a long time, watching the river and thinking about everything and nothing all at once. I thought about the town I had left behind, the people I had once called friends, and the boy who had once been my whole world. I thought about the years I had spent running, trying to outrun the memories, the regrets, the aching sense of loss that had followed me everywhere I went. And I thought about him. I thought about the way he had looked at me at the station, his eyes filled with all the things he couldn't say. I thought about the way he had walked away tonight, silent and sure, as though he knew somehow that this was the only way it could end. And maybe it was. Some people are meant to stay in your life, and some are meant to leave, and some are meant to haunt you, lingering at the edges of your mind like a half-forgotten dream. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's just the way life is, messy and complicated and beautiful in ways you don't always understand. I don't know how long I sat there, lost in thought, but when I finally stood up, the sky had shifted again, the deep indigo of night fading into the soft gray light of dawn. The first birds were beginning to stir in the trees, their songs tentative and sweet, and the air was filled with the faint, unmistakable scent of morning. I walked back to the station slowly, savoring the stillness of the early hour. The streets were empty, and the town felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for the day to begin. When I reached the station, the platform was deserted, except for a lone figure standing at the far end, his back to me. He was tall, with broad shoulders and dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. I knew, even before he turned around, who it was. He didn't seem surprised to see me. He just looked at me for a long moment, his eyes dark and unreadable, and then he nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture that felt more like an acknowledgement than a greeting. I nodded back, my heart calm and steady in my chest. We stood there on opposite ends of the platform, watching each other in the pale light of dawn. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. There was nothing left to say. The train arrived with a low, mournful whistle, and I stepped on without looking back. I found a seat by the window and watched as the platform blurred into motion, the town slipping away behind me like a fading dream. As the train picked up speed, I leaned back against the seat and closed my eyes, feeling a strange, quiet sense of peace. I didn't know where I was going or what I would find when I got there, but for the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid. I was ready to move forward, and that I realized was enough.